Hey everyone, welcome to the Interview Security Summit. I am Shayan Gupta. I lead product at Talvi on the recruitment and hiring automation side. So today's topic for the session is the IT fraud landscape and what's actually happening in 2026. And I want to start with a few numbers because I think that will set the stakes better than my commentary can. So we have heard about the recent North Korean IT worker filtrations at the Western companies, and the startling fact is that it grew to 20% year over year. So that's something which I've picked up from the CrowdStrike's recent threat report. And then Amazon alone blocked over 1,800 suspected state-sponsored applications in 18 months. And Gartner, and this one really stayed with me. So Gartner predicts that by 2028, 1 in 4 candidate profiles worldwide could be fake, right? So this isn't someone polishing a resume with a Chat GPT or a Claude. We are talking about organized state-backed operations, placing fraudulent IT workers inside all these Fortune 500 companies, people who steal source code, exfiltrate data, and funnel millions to weapons programs. And to make sense of all of this, I have two people with me today who brings very different but genuinely complementary perspectives. Professor Patrick is an organizational psychologist at the Future of Work Institute, Curtin University in Australia. His research sits right at the intersection of personnel selection, psychometric assessment, and candidate behavior in high stakes hiring, particularly around faking, overclaiming, and how technology is reshaping selection science. He's also the president of the Australasian Congress on Personality and Individual Differences. Andrew Stark is the CEO of Africa at TechCheck, which is a service of international knowledge measurement that we popularly know as IKM. Andrew has spent over 25 years in IT knowledge assessment, deploying adaptive testing solutions across blue chip companies in Africa and globally. He has been on the front lines of high fraud environments for a very long time now. Professor Patrick, Andrew, great to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I want to start with something personal, right, before we get into the data and the frameworks. So both of you have spent years, decades really, at the intersection of talent assessment and technology. There must have been a moment where IT hiring fraud went from being a thing that you occasionally heard about to something that fundamentally changed how you do your work, right? Professor Patrick, let me start with you. Your latest research makes a pretty bold argument, right? That the traditional approach of simply banning or forbidding AI use in assessments is becoming obsolete. That we are moving past the point where detect and deter is a viable strategy. So what led you there? When did you realize that the old assumptions about how we verify, say, a candidate authenticity were fundamentally breaking down?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've been interested in authenticity for a very long time. And I suppose when I started, I mean, it's always been a problem, right? We've always had to worry about whether a person's resume is accurate. Do they really have the degree they say they have? I mean, these days you can check things like that a bit more easily than you used to be able to. And then you've got assessments like personality tests, where it's very easy for somebody to claim that they're super conscientious and organized when actually they're not. It's very hard to really guard against that. There are things you can do, but so I've been interested in this kind of concept for a while, and I think I haven't got any hard data that I could say I collected to tell you what the rates of it are. But I remember when I first saw ChatGPT come out, I remember thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to do some very interesting things to our assessments. I mean, we used to do paper and pencil assessments in large lecture theatres and all that. And technology has enabled us to move away from that. And there was a lot of resistance from people like me, the organizational psychologists out there going, no, it's got to be standardized. And, people have to anyway, I won't go into that rant. And then, but sure enough, business pressures, we've got money, we need to spend money on this stuff. So obviously people will look for savings. And so we went down the unproctored pathway. ChatGPT, when I saw that, I just thought, oh my God, there are so many unproctored tests that are going to be vulnerable to this technology. And that was a very basic ChatGPT. I mean, the AI has come a long way since then. I wasn't even thinking about fraud in the IT sector specifically. I was just sort of more thinking about those candidates that are trying to not like insider threat type candidates, but just trying to land a job that they really want at a company they really like. But that other type of threat is just at another level.
No, that's a really interesting framing, and I think it connects directly to what's happening in the field as well. Andrew, I have a question for you. So I noticed that TechCheck has recently expanded from, say, a pure IT knowledge assessment into psychometric and behavioral assessments with Talent Check. Was that a response to what you are seeing in the fraud landscape? Basically, the idea from, say, testing knowledge alone isn't enough anymore.
Yeah, I think that was a very definite response to that. I think we discovered that purely testing people's knowledge or skill was really giving us half a view. I think we quickly discovered and learned that we're needing to assess those basic fundamental capabilities that you don't necessarily enroll in a course to develop, but those inherent capabilities that people are born with or take a long time to develop. And we feel that the building skill on top of that firm foundation is going to give us a far more sort of better strike rate in terms of getting people competent and proficient. So being able to assess things like learning agility, being able to assess things like curiosity, or being able to process large amounts of information, things that aren't necessarily technical skills, but being able to measure those, in some instances, those cognitive capabilities that are going to be predictors of success. It certainly gives us a more well-rounded view of an individual, and in many instances helps us to flesh out those people that are using AI to get through knowledge assessments.
Yeah, I think that's something which we are also kind of experimenting at Talview. So basically, the research and the market reality are pointing in the same direction, that the old playbook of verifying talent is fundamentally broken. So now kind of let's dig into this exactly how, right? So Andrew, let's map this out. So you have been measuring IT knowledge for over 2 decades. Walk us through what IT hiring fraud actually looks like in 2026. So if you can throw some light on the full spectrum from the everyday to the truly sophisticated.
Well, it's an interesting question, and you need to bear in mind where I'm located, right? So I'm located in South Africa. I'm responsible for the business in Africa. That means that we've been dealing with applicant fraud for a long time. As Patrick said, it's obviously shifted from people who really want jobs at companies they really like to this far more nefarious type approach. But I think we've definitely noticed an upswing, and probably more so since COVID, and ways of work have completely changed. So, prior to that, people were coming in for assessments. You could proctor them, in a live environment. That doesn't happen anymore. We're running, thousands of assessments remotely, and people are generally doing them unsupervised, until, of course, we engaged with the video proctoring offering, which we've kind of now embedded. But I mean, we've had things from, guys that collude in groups to take a single assessment. Obviously, we're able to pretty quickly identify that something suspicious has happened there. We can look at answer patterns. We can look at time they've spent on assessments. That typically seems to be one of the more common ones. Of course, the other one is being able to use your generative AI tools and being able to, in many instances, do that very, very quickly and quite accurately as well. We have some mechanisms that we have implemented to help flush that out. In terms of the really more serious stuff, I mean, look, speaking from our client profile, we deal mainly with financial services businesses, so banks, insurance companies. They're very serious risks in terms of the wrong people getting through the door. Here in South Africa, and certainly in many of our African countries that we service, you know, it's very difficult to get rid of someone once you get them in and they're a wrong hire. It costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, it impacts productivity, morale, and can take a long time to fix. So our clients are particularly focused on making sure that we establish strong degrees of ethics and integrity when we run our assessments. You know, if that means we have to activate the virtual proctoring, or it means we have to offer our clients independent assessment centers where people, you know, where we will actually invigilate testing sessions on behalf of our clients. You know, whatever we need to do to make sure that we can hand on heart tell our clients that the data we're giving them is something that they can rely on. It's predictive, it's valid, it's reliable.
No, brilliant. And one follow-up on that, right? So you mentioned all these proxy candidates and the fact that you are closely working with the BFSI and the insurance sector. So how are you seeing these proxy test taking work in practice? Like, is it more organized or it is more opportunistic?
So at this stage, it's been more opportunistic. I wouldn't say, to my knowledge, and having been flagged by any of our large users, that it's organized. But I mean, look, when ChatGPT came out, I expected the disruption to be bigger, quicker. It hasn't been as quick as I anticipated, certainly not in the markets we service. But it's coming. It's coming for sure, and we're needing to safeguard ourselves and our clients, you know, against that.
Got it. Professor Patrick, let me bring you in here. So you have written about how GenAI is creating what you call a threat to construct-related validity. The idea that test scores may start reflecting a candidate's ability to use AI rather than the actual skill that the test was supposed to measure. And you have flagged some specific technological shifts that make this harder to combat, right? Like, for example, agentic AI that can autonomously navigate a computer, smart glasses that can project AI-generated answers to the wearer during a proctored assessment. So given all of this, right, where does selection science and what does it tell us about how the nature of faking is evolving? And how does this differ from traditional, say, impression management that we have always known about?
Yeah, I think I'll start with that last bit. So I think like the probably the main difference is, I mean, the way we used to think about applicant faking behavior, just in a general term, if I can use a bit of theory, like the theory suggests that, or one of the theories suggests that faking is a product like anything else. It's a product of somebody's ability to do it well, or their belief in their ability to do it well, their motivation to do it, so wanting to do it, and having the opportunity to do it. And in fact, there's lots of models of behavior that basically say it boils down to these three forces, and faking would be no different. And I think the issue with generative AI is it just removes the ability question, right? As long as people can write a basic prompt, Gen AI can do a pretty good job of, like, for example, most structured interview questions, Gen AI is pretty good at coming up with plausible sounding responses. There might be some variants. There might be people that are really good with Gen AI and they're able to get a more sophisticated sounding response. But by and large, and prompting's getting easier with Gen AI too. So, you know, that sort of goes. So what that leaves really is motivation and opportunity. And opportunity is sort of partly determined by the sorts of assessments that we use. So I would say back in the good old days of 2021, the sorts of assessments that were hard to fake would be an interview. That was pretty hard to fake. I mean, people could lie, but you have to know what questions are coming. You have to be really clear about what your lies are going to be. And also other sort of written assessments, verbal reasoning tests were hard to fake. You'd have to, like Andrew said, get some friends who are very smart to take the tests for you and so forth. Now you've got this tool at your fingertips that can do it all, and it generally performs quite well on many of the standard sorts of assessments that we get. So I think the issue is there's just no cost to it anymore, right? There's no serious cost in putting a question into an AI tool to see what it comes up with. Whereas before, you'd have to take a risk, right? I might get my friend to take the verbal test because I think my friend is smart, but maybe they're not smart. you know, or maybe they can't be bothered helping me out and I have to ask somebody else. Now you've got this tool that's always on. You know, if you're paying a subscription, it's 20 US a month. It's not a big deal. And so I think that's what it's changed the game on that front. I think like looking forward, I don't buy into this necessarily, but I know there's a lot of sort of you know, Armageddon talk around, you know, AI replacing all the jobs that we have, and one of the forces that might further increase people's motivation to fake might be this belief that everyone else is doing it, right? So you might not want to fake, it's not who you are, but you've just realized after your 57th failed job application that everyone else is using AI. So, oh, well, I guess I've got to use it as well, right? And so I think that probably is also a bit of a game changer. The thing that probably scares me the most are these AI glasses, right? These augmented reality things, because even with those things in the you know, if people are wearing these, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell people, sorry, you can't wear glasses for this assessment, or I need to inspect your lenses before you do this assessment center? So on the one hand, that's quite terrifying. On the other hand, if we're all going to be wearing these things at work while we're doing our jobs, then maybe we need to rethink what we assess for. And I mean, Andrew alluded to this before about this, you know, the sorts of skills that and the thinking styles that may actually help us work with AI when it's always on.
Correct. Okay, we'll move on. So this is a part of the conversation that I think doesn't get enough airtime, because we are not just talking about hiring someone who can't do the job. We are talking about national security breaches, data exfiltration, sanctions violations, and basically the real reputational damage that it is causing when you hire a proxy candidate like this, right? So Andrew, let me start with you. What are your clients telling about the actual cost, the real downstream damage when a fraud IT hire gets through the process? Basically, what breaks?
So, you know, when I read your brief, this is the one area where I felt that I was going to be particularly thin on any sort of personal anecdotes or experience that I could share with you. We haven't had any of those kinds of conversations with our clients. We obviously provide a slither of the data that they use in terms of hiring. Obviously, we don't supply people. We vet their skill. But the data we provide our clients is part of a much bigger, you know, portfolio of data that they're gathering on their applicants. Other than the most obvious, you know, issues of wrong hires, I don't really have too much to contribute in terms of, you know, what research is telling us is coming downstream. But I anticipate that that'll change.
That makes sense. I think one thing that maybe I can add based on my conversations with a lot of our customers is, in fact, today morning, Indian time, I was having a conversation with one of our prospects, and what I was hearing from them was that when you hire a candidate like this, right, and they have got a few candidates in the recent few months, and that was basically too late in the process, right? Because now you have onboarded the candidate, you have spent the effort and the cost in hiring the candidate, getting that person join you, and then you have exposed that candidate in front of the customers, right? So, and now since the candidate is already in the system, you don't really know what has already happened, what kind of information the candidate has already taken with himself or herself. Right? So I was really concerned when I kind of was hearing that, but yeah, it's really scary. All right, so
can I throw in a few thoughts, because I've been thinking
absolutely.
about this a lot. Like until this meeting, I hadn't thought about it much, but in the lead up to this meeting, I was thinking about it because it is so different from faking behavior as we've typically studied it, right? I don't think those motivation, ability, opportunity factors will play out in the same way. These are not sole agents just having a laugh, right? They're, like you said, they're state sponsored, and so like for most people, the costs of trying to fake your way into a job and not succeeding are personal, right? You wasted all that time. They caught you out. You feel like you feel embarrassed. Maybe you've damaged your reputation because they'll say, "Oh, watch out for that Pat guy. He can't be trusted. He lies in his job applications." And so there is some risk to the individual, and so that pulls against the motivation to do it. That probably holds some people back. This state-sponsored stuff, it's just a job to them, right? Their job is to literally apply for these jobs. So it doesn't matter how many times they fail. It doesn't matter what strategies they use. If there's no shame or embarrassment, it's just what you're supposed to do. And so I think the interventions are completely in a different category from the interventions you would employ to try to deter AI use, or people using a friend to do a test. I saw, just coincidentally, I was browsing Reddit this morning and I came across this video. Maybe you've seen it already, but it sort of made me laugh at, but also made me worry a bit. But the video was a video recording of an interview, like a Zoom interview, and this interviewer had worked out that the candidate was a North Korean as insider threat candidate. And the interviewer said to the candidate, all right, we need to run this test because we get a lot of people from North Korea applying for this job. I want you to say the following out loud. And what he said was basically the leader's name is a big fat pig, right? That was, I need you to say that, I won't say it because it's a video recording, and the candidate just did not want to say it. You could tell he was not comfortable, and then he terminated the connection. Like never in my life would I have ever imagined myself saying, hey, listen, folks, if you want to guard against faking behavior, this is the thing you should do, right? But actually, I thought it was very clever. So, maybe it won't last very long, but yeah, that's the sort of, thing that it just stunned me.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that example, I think. So one question that I have, Professor Patrick, is, so you see all these deep fake candidates, AI-enhanced fakes come into the funnel. So what happens to the legitimate candidates? Right? When we look at, say, equity in hiring, what does that do to the entire selection pipeline?
Yeah, bad, right? So one of the problems with faking is the people who are good at faking, they typically end up at the top of these ranked lists. So what happens? You get lots of candidate data from companies like Andrew's company. When you've got lots of candidates, you usually load up Excel or some other spreadsheet, and ultimately some kind of ranking process has to happen. And for those assessments that are vulnerable to faking, and if they've got candidates that have done a good job of it, they often end up at the top of these lists. And so, typically, if you're hiring one person out of three, maybe it's less of a problem because you can do follow-up interviews and so forth. But if you're looking at, hundreds and hundreds of people, so it does displace often the sort of middle to strong candidates who have been honest throughout. I think whether or not this happens with all of these AI-enabled this AI-enabled faking is still up in the air. Like certainly for these cognitive tests that are vulnerable to AI. I mean, the paper that I wrote, we found that ChatGPT was in the 90th percentile on a verbal test, right? So they're obviously, those people using ChatGPT for that test are obviously going to end up at the top.
Yeah.
But things like one-way interviews or two-way interviews, it'll come down a little bit to how well these people have used the AI. So one of the anecdotes I can share is talking to recruiters in graduate programs in Australia. They say, oh, isn't it weird that 17 of our candidates said exactly the same thing to that in response to that question? And you know why that's happened, right? And obviously they've worked it out. They've just put the same prompt in as each other. So in a way, yeah, they're generating high quality answers. It's just they're not novel answers, and so they're not standing out. But just as a sidebar to that, and then I promise I'll be quiet for a little bit to give Andrew a chance, is if you're using AI to evaluate interview responses, one of the benefits of using AI to evaluate interview responses is that it doesn't remember the responses of other candidates like humans do. So it's not biased. But that can be a problem when you need to look for patterns like 17 copies of the same response. So I'm sort of interested to see how this unfolds.
No, I'll come to the solutions now. I think we are reaching the end of our discussion. Andrew, so basically from a TechCheck's adaptive methodology, that is something which we all know about. It's very well known in the market. But you have also added practical coding challenges recently, right? So how does combining the adaptive knowledge testing with hands-on coding verification specifically make proxy test taking harder?
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to do is provide as much data as we can so that we can cross-check, on a particular candidate with multiple lenses. So, we'll look at sort of practical coding challenges where we obviously will do our best to check for plagiarism. We'll run those code challenges through various generative AI tools and populate the database with those. common responses to flush out plagiarism. But at the end of the day, you do get a lot of false positives. It does require manual intervention to then sit down and understand whether that really was plagiarized code or not.
Yeah.
We'll also do the adaptive testing approach, which means adaptive testing, multiple select, which gives us the ability to, typically what we find with people who use AI tools is they're giving a single response to a question, they're missing the second or the third response, which typically indicates that they're giving a response and moving on to the next question. So we can see patterns in terms of whether they've given multiple responses or single responses. That's typically looking more at the knowledge-based theory. So we'll look at the knowledge-based theory, we'll look at the practical application, certainly for coding and data engineering and quality engineering. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll then throw in the mix your cognitive type stuff, logical reasoning, some sort of learning agility, some sort of computational thinking, just to see that if an individual has shot the lights out in terms of the practical aspect, there really should be a correlation in terms of their ability to understand language, work with numbers, solve problems. And so we're always looking at cross-checking and cross-referencing that data. I'd have to say that my more successful clients have been the ones that have employed that approach rather than a single lens. But I mean, it's pretty exciting because it's always changing, right? We're waking up next week and discovering that there's new holes that we need to plug. So we stick close to our clients and get as much feedback as we can and make sure that we're enhancing the product and the offering to make sure that we, as I said earlier, give them the most ethical and integrous experience with the tools.
Correct. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that feedback. I think that's a very good framework to evaluate or do like a 360 check on the candidates. Professor Patrick, so your most recent paper, right, proposes something you call as the FAIR framework, right? 4 distinct strategies that employers use depending on the context. So I would love you to walk our audience through that, because I think it's one of the most practical research-backed playbook I have seen on this topic. And for those listening, FAIR stands for Forbid, Insulate, Advise, and Reimagine. Professor Patrick, can you take us through each of those and help our audience think about which strategy fits which situation?
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about this. Has been one of my favorite projects. I'm an academic, but I love getting my hands dirty, right, with real practical problems. And so this framework's one of the few opportunities I've had to build something like this. So essentially, in this paper, we're trying to give some. It's not like concrete advice, like in this situation, do this. Like we cannot promise anything as clear cut as that. But we identified a bunch of strategies and sort of categorized them according to sort of two different dimensions. So I guess one dimension, it's a bit hard to define this, but what we were thinking about with this was the extent to which your organization is either comfortable with AI or wanting to insulate itself from AI as much as possible, and also in how risk averse it might be. So these kind of high stakes situations that Andrew mentioned before will be on one side of the continuum, but on the other end of the continuum, you might be more comfortable with this sort of risk. And so that's one dimension. The other dimension sort of distinguishes between strategies that aim to try to influence what the candidates choose to do. So how can you orient them to use AI in a way that you would be comfortable with them using it? And the other opposite end of that continuum focuses on the design of an assessment. So what we're really getting at there is, can you design something that is just either completely AI proof or just embraces AI actively, incorporates AI into the system? So you get those 4 quadrants. So forbid, that's the F in FAIR. That's about just being really clear with candidates. Do not use AI. It is not welcome. If we identify that we suspect you've used it, then there will be consequences. Or you might embed some software that prevents it. So some of the proctoring software that you mentioned earlier might be relevant, or preventing copy paste, or keeping tabs on whether someone's holding up their screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's look forward. So we are in early 2026. We just discussed that the fraud ecosystem is evolving fast. The AI capabilities are advancing every single day. Andrew, one question for you. From the assessment and measurement front lines, right? What should talent and security leaders be preparing for right now that isn't fully on their radar?
Look, from where we sit in the markets we service and the clients we speak to, I think they are probably slightly delayed in terms of responding to this new threat. So I think, I think, without giving anything away or the kind of markets we service, I think guys we're finding that they're slightly on the back foot. So I think we're going to have to get a lot better at handling these kinds of risks. Certainly from a talent acquisition and onboarding perspective. I think, if I look at these markets we service and the kind of graduate and internship programs that the clients are kind of spinning up, we're dealing with a significant talent shortage in this part of the world. So, we're finding that organizations are having to do a lot better with the talent they've got. So, they're building sort of multi-dimensional skill sets inside of the organization, redeploying people, using process automation to automate certain tasks, redeploying people across the business. We're finding less of a demand in terms of bringing new talent into the business, certainly through the traditional channels. Organizations are spinning up academies, creating their own sort of supply of talent with graduate programs and internships. So, I think they're certainly going to have to get better equipped and better prepared to deal with these kinds of risks, because we're opening up segues for millions and millions of people to enter the job market that previously didn't have that access, certainly in the markets we service. So I'd have to say that is the one thing that we've kind of seen, is that they're sort of on the back foot. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this space, because we can't not have the verification. We can't not have the ability to understand who we're bringing into the organization.
No, I think that's a very good suggestion. I think that's something which will be a key takeaway as well. And coming to you, Professor Patrick. So in your paper, you have argued that, because the future of work involves human-AI collaboration, the future of hiring should assess that collaboration rather than trying to prevent it. So what does the next generation of selection look like when we accept the premise of future of hiring should assess that collaboration rather than trying to, I would say, prevent it?
Yeah, it's so easy for me to write those words in the paper, but it is so hard to actually put that into practice, right? There are lots of tensions. So one of the tensions is AI just keeps changing, right? So you might spend hundreds of thousands of dollars designing a fantastic assessment only to discover that the way people work with AI when they're at work is nothing like it was when you designed that assessment. So there's a big risk. There's a big financial risk for anyone going down that path. So I could see that as like, the idea is, I think it's probably, we probably need to let it stabilize a little bit, and like there probably is, like, I know, but I feel like there's probably an asymptote where AI doesn't get that much better, and the way we interact with it doesn't change that much. Like we've got speech, and we're looking at things like, how many other ways can we possibly interact with AI? We're not plugging things into our brains directly yet. So I think probably that opportunity will surface when we're a bit clearer about where this is going. you know, I think like going back to your question, what's the near future looking like? I mean, okay, no one, it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But like, I guess the two things that were on my mind were, one is the arms race is like, I've never seen anything like this unfold so quickly, right? So there's, you know, there's people using AI, and so proctoring software gets invented. And I just saw a video on YouTube the other day where the guy had managed to write software that spoofs, that tricks the proctoring software as well. And no doubt you're already onto that, and you've got something that, you know, that's a countermeasure to that. And from an academic perspective, it's very, very interesting to see this. I think the second thing, I mean, Andrew's right that there is a gap in awareness, and I think probably technology is the forefront. Right? I think this is where the tech people are the ones that are experimenting with AI to make deep fakes of themselves, right? And so obviously that sector is very desirable to work at. There's this, big salaries and so forth, and then you've got that tension between the talent shortage and needing to kind of annoy your candidates a little bit with stupid verification things, right? Why do you need to send me? Why do you need to see my passport? Well, actually, it's a serious problem. Well, that's your problem, not my problem. So I can see why organizations are struggling to find that balance. I think like one thing I'll say, like from other parts of psychology, we do know that people are often willing to tolerate a bit of pain as long as they really understand why, right? If they're just told you must do this because it solves our problem, that's not really very enticing. But I think they'll be a lot more sympathetic if they understand, hey, listen, we know this is actually really annoying, but the reason we've got to do this is because if we don't, we're worried that we might miss out on hiring you because someone managed to trick us, and this is our safeguard against that. That kind of messaging, I think, will help, but it, you know, some candidates will still resist it.
No, that's brilliant. I think we have reached the end of our session. Thank you so much, Professor Patrick, Andrew, for taking your time out. And this has been the exact kind of grounded and practical conversation that this topic needed. So just to summarize, right? So here's what is very clear that has come out of our discussion. So hiring fraud in itself in 2026 is not a niche problem. It's basically like a industrial scale operation that spans state-sponsored infiltrations, organized proxy networks, AI-enabled deception that we just discussed, and the videos that Professor Patrick brought in the conversation. And the hiring pipeline itself has become like a threat surface, right? And most organizations still aren't treating it like one, so that awareness is something that Andrew has also mentioned. But on the other side of the coin, right, we have the science, the tools, the field experience to fight back. That's what we just discussed and concluded. So thank you so much for taking your time out. Thank you for joining this session of the Interview Security Summit.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day.